Shabbat Shalom. It was a very long flight from New York all the way to Australia. And so when they finally land, the Italian guy thinks to himself, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have a glass of wine. And after this long flight, the Scotsman says to himself after finally landing, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have a glass of scotch. And indeed, it was a ridiculously long flight, so the Russian man, upon landing, thinks to himself, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have some vodka. And indeed, New York to Australia is no joke. So it was that the Jewish guy says to himself upon landing, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have diabetes. We Jews, we know from Tsuris and Vey. On a national level, of course, it's tough to be a Jew. We know from Tsuris and Vey. And on a human level, we know that much of life is confronting the Tsuris and Vey that comes with getting older, with living, with breathing. There's Tsuris and Vey. And I think a good part of Judaism, in fact, is trying to help us find the joy and the gratitude of life in the midst of confronting our Tsuris and Vey. With that, we come to our Torah portion this week, Parashat Tazria-Metzora. And it's a fascinating Torah portion because really it takes a clinical look at people suffering from this tzara'at, this affliction, this ailment. And it addresses how we deal with it. It doesn't particularly judge them. It doesn't criticize them. It just gives us a formula for dealing with it as a society and for individuals to get through this Tsuris and Vey, this moment in their life. Now it's clear from our text that the Tsuris and Vey, that the ailment, the affliction, the tzara'at that these people are suffering from is not a physical condition. It's translated often as leprosy in the Torah. It's not a good in the Chumash and the translations. It's not a good translation because typically leprosy doesn't affect walls and furniture. But this tzara'at does. And so later on, our rabbis will come to tell us that what is the nature of this tzara'at, this affliction, that could affect not only skin, but walls and furniture. Is a punishment for lashon hara. It's a punishment for engaging in evil speech. And later in the Torah, we read the story of Miriam getting stricken with leprosy. And the rabbis say, why is she stricken with this tzara'at? It must have been because she was engaging in lashon hara, and evil speech. And indeed, as we dive into the Talmud, into Masechet Brachot, this tractate on blessings, our rabbis begin to struggle and ask the question, what is the nature of affliction? How do we begin to understand this Tsuris and Vey that's such a part of our experience as human beings? And the rabbis tell us first and foremost that anybody who experiences Tsuris and Vey in their life, illness, sickness, suffering, affliction, pain, sadness, anyone who experiences these things must first take an accounting of their own actions and ask the question, is God punishing me for something I did wrong? Now, this is not a touchy-feely approach to dealing with suffering, to confronting the Tsuris and Vey that is such a part of the human condition. But what I appreciate about it is the accountability that it offers us. Too much of our society today in the 21st century is about blaming others. If anything is wrong, it must be somebody else's fault. But the first thing that Tractate Brachot tells us is if something is wrong, look at your own actions. What have you done to bring about this current condition? And not like an abusive parent, but like a parent who loves their children and out of love for their children punishes them in order to teach them a lesson and to change their ways. Maybe the Tsuris and Vey that we're dealing with in that moment is a punishment from God as a means of correcting our behavior. And sometimes we can accept that. Okay, I see what I've done wrong, and I'm going to change my ways. And maybe with a temporary affliction, we can even wrap our heads around that God must be trying to teach us a lesson. What is the lesson that I'm supposed to learn? How am I to better my ways after going through this Tsuris and Vey? How can I be kinder? How can I help others more? How can I be more righteous? But then our rabbis recognize that punishment is not always the reason for the Tsuris and Vey in our lives. And so the Talmud goes on to tell us that if you've taken accounting of yourself and you don't see any major sins, then maybe the Tsuris and Vey that you're experiencing is a result of bittul Torah, the Talmud says. That maybe you're suffering, maybe you're going through this affliction because you had an opportunity to study Torah and you didn't take advantage of the opportunity. Now, I have to tell you that I like this theology very much. And so if anybody starts to miss my adult education classes, I'm going to tell you, look what will happen to you if you start to skip Rabbi Starr's Torah study opportunities. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true. But the rabbis go down the list, and if you're suffering, if your Tsuris and Vey, if your affliction is not a result of sins that you've committed, and it's not a result of you missing opportunities to study Torah, then maybe the Tsuris and Vey, maybe the suffering and affliction in your life is a result of Yisurin shel Ahava, chastisements of love. Yisurin shel Ahava. And the rabbis go into great length to wrestle, what is this idea of Yisurin shel Ahava, chastisements of love, my suffering, my illness, my pain, my loss, is a result of chastisements of love? And here the rabbis begin to explain, what could this mean, this Yisurin shel Ahava, these chastisements of love? And they come to say that perhaps in the next world, when God is preparing us for heaven, the spiritual cleansing is a difficult process. So if God can spiritually cleanse us in this finite world, then we don't have to go through a longer cleansing process in the eternal world. And therefore, we should give thanks that God is making it easier for us by allowing us to suffer here rather than suffering in the thereafter. These are chastisements of love. Still, other rabbis come to explain the Yisurin shel Ahava, these chastisements of love, as an opportunity in this world for us to transcend our physical being to really focus on our spiritual lives. If our bodies are made frail, we can no longer focus on our physical wants and desires. But instead, we should spend our time, invest our time focusing on spiritual pursuits, trying to be closer to God. And thereby, these Yisurin shel Ahava, these chastisements of love, are simply opportunities for us to get past our physical needs and wants in order to really focus on our spirituality. So what do you think? Do you buy this? As a means of Tsuris and Vey and understanding the suffering in the world? Could it be that God is punishing us? Could it be that God is sending the message that you need to spend more time studying Torah? Could it be that God is simply offering us Yisurin shel Ahava, chastisements of love? And then there's an interesting story appended onto the end of that discussion in the Talmud in Masechet Brachot that seems to throw all of that on its head. And the story is of one rabbi coming to another rabbi, and that other rabbi is sick and he's laying in bed. And the one healthy rabbi sits down next to his sick teacher and says, "You must be grateful for the suffering you're going through. You must be so happy with your Tsuris and Vey, because surely it's a sign of God trying to teach you a lesson. Or it's a sign of these Yisurin shel Ahava." And the sick rabbi says, "I'm not grateful for any Tsuris and Vey." And the other rabbi says, no, see, look, it must be a really good thing. God's trying to teach you something. God's giving you an opportunity. And the sick rabbi says, "I'm never grateful for Tsuris and Vey." And so they go back and forth like this for quite some time until finally the healthy rabbi takes the sick rabbi's hand and simply says, "I'm here with you now. May you be healed." And you know what? That's what brought healing. And the culmination of that story is the idea that maybe we don't understand God's ways. Maybe simply prayer doesn't change things. Maybe God is not the benevolent, omnipotent God in the way we understand it. And maybe the only healing that can really come in the midst of Tsuris and Vey is when we visit another person, when we talk to them, and we say, "What are you learning from this? How are you growing now?" And most importantly, "I'm here for you. What can I do? I'm here for you. What can I do?" So it is that our rabbis struggle with the nature of the Tsuris and Vey that is the human condition. And perhaps the best way to bring healing is to couple our prayer with physical touch, with simply being present with those who are suffering. And indeed, from this, the rabbis teach that a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. One who is suffering from Tsuris and Vey, one who's going through affliction, can't bring their own healing through self-reflection, through looking at their Torah study, or even through embracing the idea of chastisements of love. This last story appended onto the end says the only real healing can come when one person reaches out to another person with love and affection. Now, of course, that reminds me of the story of Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg was terribly sick. He was experiencing a tremendous amount of Tsuris and Vey. And so he and Mrs. Goldberg went to the doctor to see what was wrong. And after lengthy tests and analysis, the doctor says to Mr. Goldberg, "Mr. Goldberg, I think you should go wait in the car. Let me take a minute to talk with Mrs. Goldberg." And sure enough, Mr. Goldberg goes out to the car full of anxiety over what the doctor is going to say, and the doctor sits down Mr. Goldberg's wife, Mrs. Goldberg, and says to her, "Your husband is very sick, but I think he can have another 20 years of life if you really go out of your way to make his life perfect. Every morning when he wakes up, put his slippers right next to the bed. Make him a hot breakfast. And as he goes off to work, give him a hug and a kiss and tell him he's the greatest thing that's ever happened in your life." And then the doctor continues, "Throughout the day when he's at work, you should call your husband and tell him how good and how wonderful he is." And Mrs. Goldberg's listening intently, and the doctor says, "Yes, and when he comes home at the end of the day, you should prepare for him his favorite food each and every day. And then throughout the evening and the nighttime, give him whatever he wants, however he wants. And if you do this day after day, giving your husband everything he wants and making life just perfect for him, he'll have another 20 years. Mrs. Goldberg finishes listening to the doctor, and she goes out to the car. And she sits down next to Mr. Goldberg, who, full of anxiety, says to Mrs. Goldberg, "No, what did the doctor say?" Mrs. Goldberg responds to her husband, "He said you're going to die." When we deal with Tsuris and Vey in our lives, we're challenged. We're given an opportunity to engage in our own self-reflection. What have I done wrong? How can I take accountability for this illness and therefore change my life? When we experience Tsuris and Vey, suffering and affliction in our lives, we have the opportunity to ask ourselves, I didn't cause this, but I can learn from it. What can I learn from this suffering that will make my life better? And perhaps even more importantly, what can I learn from my illness that will make others' lives better? And finally, when we're suffering from Tsuris and Vey, may we remember that the best thing we can do is accept the love of others And when we are healthy ourselves, among the best things that we can do is engage in the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick, whether that's a spouse, whether that's a family member, or whether that's simply a friend, to go out of our way to visit, to engage in words of kindness and care and compassion, and to take the hand or the arm of that person who's suffering and say, I'm here for you now. What can I do? On this Shabbat of Parashat Tazria-Metzora, may we understand that Tsuris and Vey are part of the human condition. But our Judaism, our faith, offers us a path to understanding. And our role in community grants us the blessing of the opportunity of being with incredibly kind and compassionate people. And our Judaism gives us the mitzvah, the obligation, the commandment, to do everything we can to ease the suffering of others. Ken Yi Ratzon, may this be God's will. May this be our will. And let us say together, Amen, and Shabbat Shalom.